I can't stop running into designers and design firms that either didn't start or cut their teeth at resource. So you guys have a significant entrepreneurial and economic impact on Columbus, and probably where you have other offices as well. Is that strategic? Is that just a derivative of the fact that you hire great people who are creative and sometimes they get the urge to go out on their own and put out their own shingle and do stuff on their own? What do you think that's about? Because I see it more from you guys than I do even other agencies in other locations.
Yeah, so there's a lot of questions in there.
Yes.
Let me unpack them. Well, thank you, because I think that that's a compliment. As much as it is always difficult to have really talented people leave a business and go on. John, looking at you. It's actually really rewarding too. I mean, it's interesting. We were talking to some of my associates about this today in a town hall, and initially when somebody leaves, it's sad and it's painful. Sometimes it hurts. Sometimes you take it personally. But when you kind of step back from it, there's lots of good things that do come from it, and people are stretching into new opportunities or starting businesses or being promoted or whatever. There's all kinds of reasons, and so that creates opportunity for them as they leave, but it also creates opportunity for people in the business to step up or get promoted or stretch in new ways. So it's bittersweet, to be quite honest, but I think if I look at kind of the big picture, it's kind of cool to create an ecosystem of talented and interconnected people. I think people who work at Resource sort of feel like there's always a connection in some way, shape, or form, and that lives on. But when I was just getting out of school, sorry, I feel like this is buzzing.
Yeah, here.
Since nobody wants to talk, I will just yell my questions.
When I was getting out of school, it was the same thing for Richardson Smith at the time. Some of you are too young, or maybe you didn't live in this market, but Richardson Smith was really the design consulting company before IDEO was like as big as IDEO is today. They were ultimately acquired by Fitch, but if you look at the founders of that business, Dave Smith and Dean Richardson, they were my first mentors for 10 years. I was so lucky to be in that creative sandbox. And if you look at all the companies that they spun off, how many people are running companies, started their own company, went off to create something new, it was the same thing. It was 30 years ago. So in many ways, maybe we learned some lessons from them, but I would say it's really more about Nancy Kramer's entrepreneurial spirit that sort of like drives the whole thing. And it happens to be where in a business where digital talent, whether it's technical, whether it's creative, whether it's data oriented, is in high demand. And so it just happens to be a hot business too, a hot area of business.
Yeah, switching, and we'll talk more about mentoring, but sort of switching gears to something that you probably spent a lot of time and energy on. You made an acquisition recently of a creative firm in New York. Can you talk about that a little bit? Why you did it, if there was other acquisition, activity in the future for you guys?
Yeah, definitely. It's our first, so maybe I'm too close. What am I doing wrong? It's our first acquisition, so we'll be we're in our 33rd year of business, so it was our first acquisition. And it was very strategic and very purposeful, and we worked on it, finding the right fit for about 18 months. And really, it's market driven and understanding kind of where the world's going and where the world, what clients need from a creative services company. And we know that in digital marketing, that if you look at our landscape, everybody's doing digital. 5 years ago, PR companies didn't do digital. Systems integrators weren't really claiming digital marketing. Ad tech companies weren't really in the creative services space, and the list goes on and on and on. And so we really felt like the play is to not just be in a digital execution play, but to be in a strategic leadership role with clients. And so part of what we've been building is more capability to lead not just the digital, but to lead the brand building. And so for us, it's more of a comprehensive, we want to lead the entire brand and work on their advertising and their package and the whole digital experience that goes around it. So it's very strategic. And we went into, we hired a broker, we went into New York, and we looked at, they fed us maybe, I don't know, 50 or 60 companies. We met with about 25, narrowed down to 12, went through another round, narrowed down to 4, and then liked 2 quite a lot, and then decided that one was really more of a cultural fit, and so that's kind of, it was a very disciplined process, and it's really cool. We only announced it 40 days ago, and we already have all this work that's happening across both offices, helping each other with existing clients and helping each other with new prospective pitches, which has been really awesome. So far, so good.
That's good to hear, because a lot the M&A sector, if you will, is strewn with failures, right? Because it on the surface it seems really good and it seems like it should work, but the actual work of making it work can be pretty challenging.
Yeah.
So you guys are doing well so far with that sort of cross-functional team.
Yeah, like our capabilities are really complementary. We have a really small overlap, and so I mean, I just cannot underscore the importance enough about having a cultural fit. So we were involved in some business dealings, almost 15 years ago, where the cultures weren't aligned and the values weren't aligned, and it wasn't successful. And it wasn't successful for any other reason. It was really all about values and culture. So that part is huge. And so I think that spending so much time to find that was important. And that our capabilities are complementary. So we're not competing, we're complementing. And it's interesting, like our folks have gone there and made their work better, and they're like, whoa, this is awesome. And then they've had folks come to our office and bring expertise, and the same thing happens. So, there's always that little angst in the ranks that you get, and people are wondering, oh, what does this really mean? But I think what the early signs that we're already showing is it means it's really going to be fun, actually.
So do you see more acquisitions in the future? Do you think you're where you want to be from a capabilities perspective?
I just really want to have one that works, Now maybe, but we really are just focused on let's do this right. We have an integration plan. I have 12 or so work streams and a different leader and milestones at 3, 6, 12, 18, 24 months. We're running a really disciplined process. And we just want to be successful with that. So I wouldn't say never, but I wouldn't say, I'm not focused on that. I'm focused on successful integration at kind of every dimension.
So how do you, so let's talk about leading and running resource, the sans acquisition even. How do you look at the company and know whether you're succeeding or not succeeding?
There's lots of KPIs for that. So you see it in your financials sometimes. You see it in the feedback, quite honestly. You see it in clients deciding to do more work with you or less work with you. You can see it in the quality of the work in the hallways. You can feel it in the energy of the people. And we don't always have it figured out. We actually have all of our own trials and tribulations. But I think what's maybe a little bit different is that we want to hear about it. We want to talk about it. I just had a town hall with the whole company, and then did it with our Chicago office and our Cincinnati office, and tomorrow I'll do it with our San Francisco office, of just saying, here's what's going on, here's what I'm hearing, ask your questions. Here's what's not factually accurate that's kind of floating around the hallways. And so having that kind of posture of transparency and openness, and we share our financials, and people know when we're hitting our goals or not hitting our goals. And so there's a lot of ways, I think, of knowing. You never have, there's never all of them green light.
Yeah, all the lights aren't green at the same time, right?
Never, no.
As we were talking before, there's sort of a myth. It's a little bit, doing a startup has become, being entrepreneurs become a little romantic, and we can all, grow up to be billionaires.
It only takes 15 people, no revenue, you make $1 billion, isn't that the formula?
Right, just, come up with the right idea and don't execute it, and, something, you'll be okay. But there is sort of this theory that if you get to a certain threshold, that you'll be successful. If I can get to 1,000 users, if I can get to $1 million, if I get to $10 million in revenue, if I can get seed money, and success is different for everybody, but there's you're never really there, and I think that your experience in running resource is it's your challenges aren't necessarily the same as they were a year ago. They might be different. So what is it like, trying to run an evolving agency in a very dynamic space, even though most outsiders would look at you and your leadership team and the company and say you're successful?
So there's a lot of questions in there, right?
Yes, I know how to really bake them all into one.
Well, like one, it was funny, like I have 2 teenagers. I have a son who's 18, he's graduating and going off to college, and he said the other day, God, Mom, you seem a little stressed out, is everything going on, what's going on? And I was like, well, like stuff going on, so, some work that requires my attention, and I try not to burden my kids with that kind of thing. And he said, Mom, what could you possibly be stressed out about? And I said, well, that's interesting. Why do you ask? And then he goes, because I'm stressed. I've got school, and I've got to get into college, and I got to figure out how to pay for gas, and
I need some new jeans.
I don't know what my major's going to be. I feel the weight of the world on my shoulders. And then I realized it really is all about kind of perspective. It's like, oh my God, he probably really does feel that. And he goes, what could you possibly be stressed out about? You have a job, you have a house, you have a car, you've already picked your husband, and you've already had 2 kids. So what else could you possibly be stressed out about? I thought that was adorable.
Take him to a board meeting.
So it is all a matter of perspective. So I don't think of success. I mean, the startup world is totally different. I haven't done a startup, so I can't appreciate all the milestones and some of maybe the expectations that have been set in startup land. And I don't think of success as if I only get, because it's just the bar just keeps going up. So I don't know, I just have a totally different perspective. I had my first boss who told me it's all about working with people you respect and doing work that you think matters, and that's as simple as that. And so that's always what I focused on, and knowing what my values are and never compromising my values. And so when you're living from more of a pure place like that, the success criteria are a little bit different. I sort of feel like success is an outcome when you're focused on what you value and who you are, and you surround yourself with people you really respect, and success becomes an outcome. That's just kind of how my life has unfolded. But I totally get the pressure in startup land. I think that's intimidating. You have to you're only relevant if you only have raised so much money, or you have so many users. And so there's a lot of false metrics, I think, that sort of spur on this startup world that I kind of think is unfortunate, quite honestly. And when Instagram, gets their $1 billion for no revenue and 15 people, it's shocking, actually. Is anybody watching Silicon Valley on HBO? Did anybody have HBO? Do you guys have HBO? Is it not part of the plan? I know it's sort of old school, not really digital, but it's hilarious because they've captured startup world in such an awesome way of the trials and tribulations, the relationship dynamics, trying to get these important meetings to raise money, living in a house together, all the infights and not being inarticulate about the vision and the value proposition and struggling to capture all of that. So I would highly recommend it if you can, like, find it some way. But I kind of like was Securitas too. You asked me a number of questions, and I don't know that I answered them all, but
I don't remember what they were.
okay, so really about leadership and success, and like, I'm really goal-oriented. One of the things that we do in our business is we have company goals, we have department goals, we have individual goals, and then they all ladder up. So we don't always achieve them, but we're really clear about articulating what they are, and so we do have a way of saying, are we being successful? Are we getting better? Are we meeting our goals? I think that when you're in a startup, you might maybe be less inclined to write some of those down and sort of push yourself on all those dimensions. But I think that's one of the things we've gotten pretty good at, is saying every person contributes to the bigger picture and trying to break that into 3 or 4 things, and then down to every team and every department and every person. And so that everybody knows what their contribution is to the bigger picture.
Well, maybe it's a good sign that nobody in here can afford HBO. Because, you'd all should be broke doing startups, right? That's good, I think. But I don't have HBO either, but that's just because I don't want that many choices on my TV, because I'm old and I don't want to make that many decisions. Mentoring is something near and dear to your heart. You wrote an article for Forbes about a concept that was at least new to me, the concept of reverse mentoring. Talk about that a little bit, and why you feel it's important and why it's valuable.
Yeah. Well, I never want to be one of those people that stops learning. And I've had some clients over the years, and especially in the earlier days, and still today, where they'll have a computer on their desk, but they don't actually turn it on, or they don't, respond to their own emails, or they don't download apps, and they don't engage in what I would call today's digital culture. And I think that that's a recipe for irrelevance. And so as we've grown across offices and capabilities and more talent, and one of the things I wanted to just kind of stay abreast of is just what's new and happening in the world, and what are innovations happening around the globe that are changing brands, changing consumer experience, how are emerging technologies being used in wholly new ways. And so I found a young guy in our office who super quiet, under the radar, no visibility to other teams or leaders or clients. And I was like, how about you? And he was super nervous at first, and then realized, like, oh my gosh, I have something to contribute. So
did you literally just pick him out because he was kind of, did you pick him out because you noticed that he was kind of reserved?
Yeah, I noticed that he was wicked smart and holding back, and maybe in a group that wasn't set up to let his talents shine. And so I checked in with his manager, and he said, oh, that's really interesting, he'd totally dig that, you should ask him personally. And so I kind of did.
And you scared the shit out of him.
Yeah, probably. I didn't mean to, but I'm sure he was nervous at first, and the first times we got together, he was kind of shaky, and but then it just became so smooth and interesting, and he was pumped up, and always brought fascinating stuff that I would have never known was going on in Korea, or what Coca-Cola did in Singapore, or the new contact lenses that had a display in your retina, and all these things. So it just was helping me stay fresh, and what I could bring to him was hooks into the business, like, you should go talk to this person about that, or you should go show this client at P&G that, because it'll be relevant. So what I was doing is very subtly creating hooks into the business that allowed him to build bridges and relationships, but a chance to bring expertise into a place where he might not have otherwise been exposed. So I think he was learning how to make it relevant, and what I was learning was so many fresh examples that was just keeping my mind, I think, active in that way. It was really awesome. One of the breakthrough moments, though, and I don't know if any of you have done 23andMe. Have you had your DNA decoded? Has anybody done that? So it's the wife of Sergey Brin, who started the company like, I don't know, 5+ years ago. When they first came out, it was like $1,500. And I was like, gosh, I want to have my DNA decoded, but I don't really want to spend $1,500. And then it kept going down and down and down. It's only like $100 now. And then I was too nervous. So I turned 50 and I was like, crap, like life sort of feels like this when you're 30. It sort of feels like this. And so then I got too scared to do it because I didn't really want to know, like, am I going to get Alzheimer's like my dad? Am I going to get, this like my, so I got too scared. Well, he came in to one of my meetings, and this is what I love about this generation. And he said, hey, Kelly, yeah, I did 23andMe. I had my DNA decoded. You want to see my results? I was like, oh my God, what do you mean? Like, he's like, yeah, I'm still learning. And I'm like, you're going to show me like what diseases you might be inclined to get or what you might like die of or
awkward.
And he was like, totally, this is so interesting. I want to share it with you. And it was just sort of like this moment that was brave and transparent and very representational, I think, of the generation of like, this is how medicine will happen with this generation. Like, here's my DNA, and my medicine's different than your medicine because, like, my DNA is sort of exposed and obvious to my physicians. And so it was just this moment. I was like, whoa, this kid. So I literally walked out of that room, went home, ordered the kits. My husband and I did it, totally went through the whole process and kind of confronted it. And it was very liberating. And I would never have done that without him. So it emboldened me in a completely unexpected way.
So which of your colleagues have you shared your?
You know what? I haven't. That's again. It's like we're boomers. We're a little like.
So you've got another stage of progression that you have to go through.
But you have to make choices. Like, do you want to unlock this to learn about your cancer likelihood? And so you have these choices you make that kind of unlock your information. So I unlocked it all. I just haven't gone any further than that.
Yeah, there are certainly some instances in life where I think ignorance is still bliss, and that may be indeed one of them is when you get to be our age, not like a lot of the folks involved in a startup might be. They're worried about other things. So mentoring from an organizational perspective is important to you guys, and is it a way that you bring in less experienced people and have them either become more experienced, which I mean that's like duh, right? They bring them in and they're less experienced, they become more experienced. Of course they do. But is that a key piece of them gaining experience by learning from others internally versus sort of learning on the job, for lack of a better term, on client projects? How do you use mentoring as a layer on top of them learning as they're actually working on serving your clients?
Yeah.
I just rambled for like 90 seconds. I have no idea what I just asked.
It's a combination of things. I mean, I actually think the data shows that learning on the job is where you actually get the greatest skill development, knowledge development. And I actually believe that versus training in the classroom and some of those things. But I do think mentoring is a kind of a layer on top of it. And I guess what I think about it is different than maybe the way I grew up with it. Mentoring always used to be that person older than you that you looked up to and had all the answers. And I think of it as more of a value exchange, a knowledge exchange now, rather than like I know more than you do. It's more of we both know something different and we can help each other. And so, I mean, I go back to kind of, again, my early days at Richardson Smith, and I remember my first boss said, Kelly, you should always feel like you have a personal board of directors. You should always have people in your circle who know things you don't know, and they help you and you help them, and that's how everybody gets stronger. And it was so obvious and simple advice, but I actually took that advice and have had my whole career. Like, I have people in my life who know more about banking and finance than I ever want to, and so I have to rely on that. Or who know, about technology in ways that I could never know, or the law and translating intellectual property law and how that impacts us, and on and on and on and on. I can't possibly know everything. And so I think, especially in a startup, recognizing that even if it's your idea, even if you're the CEO, if it's your vision, there's so many facets that you probably don't know and you need to fill in. And so I think of mentoring, I guess, just differently than, senior to junior. I think of it as two people exchanging value with each other. So
great, thanks. Let's talk about design and designers and the importance of both the person and the activity in startups. As we were talking earlier, you guys have been involved with the Branbury, and they've sent you, and the Branbury, for those that don't know, is a incubator in Cincinnati that I think that they're certainly a top 10 incubator now, if maybe not, top 5 across the country. And so they've had some good success figuring out how to help support startups. And you guys, I know, worked with road trippers, and you were saying that they actually started somewhere other than with the road trippers.
yeah, I'm trying to remember back. That was the first one we worked on, actually. But the ideas generally have pivoted, I think, or it certainly evolved. To pivot might be too strong on some of them, but yeah, I mean, so you want me just to talk about design or our experience with the Branbury, or what do you want to hear?
Yeah, so your experience with the Branbury and sort of the importance and role of design and designers in startups, given that with all due respect, to retail startups and product companies, etc., when most of us think of startups, we think of technical and software startups now.
It's funny, one of my first sort of breakout opportunities to speak in a large room was with Guy Kawasaki. You guys know him? Yeah, okay. So I had written this little booklet, John, this might have been back in your era, and it was called the 10 Demandments. I had done all this sort of research, and everybody would say, well, what do you think about, how can businesses be relevant, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, because of technology, we're going to be more knowledgeable, therefore more demanding than ever before. So I wrote this little booklet, I put it up online, and Guy Kawasaki found it and was like, whoa, can you come and talk to my boot camp? And I'm like, I don't really know anything about startups. And there are all these people speaking about funding and speaking about technology and speaking about the law and intellectual property and all this stuff. And I was the only one. So this would have been in 2000 maybe. And he had these boot camps that had 800 people, 1,000 people. It was kind of a big deal. And I was the only one talking about the consumer. So it wasn't design per se, but it was to say, you guys are talking about technology and trying to find a place for it. And what I want to talk about is the opposite of that, is trying to identify a need and then bring a solution to it. And it was so foreign, so that he invited me back multiple times. The first time I was totally a bomb because they were like, what is this girl, first of all, in this space of all men at the time, and talking about consumer and not technology. And then slowly it started to evolve. They're like, oh, okay, we get it. And so that's kind of the contribution. I feel like you have to start with the consumer, and I really think that's where, or the user in some cases, if it's not a consumer business. But I think that's what the Branbury is doing right. So Dave Knox and the guys that got that going, know those guys, respect them, admire them, and I think what they're trying to do for Cincinnati, put Cincinnati on the map, and I'm a little envious about this in terms of Columbus, but I think that they want to be the hotbed of saying we're going to create startups that are totally tuned into their audience and totally know who they're serving and have identified a market and are bringing a solution to a market. Instead of, here's a cool technology, I wonder if somebody will buy this. And so they're taking all the P&G consumer insight of Cincinnati and sort of, I think, making that the heartbeat of the Branbury, which is a long way of saying that translates into design. So you can't design if you don't know who you're designing for and what problem you're solving. And so I think what they're getting is the best of both of those. They're getting deeper insight around a consumer and a market, and they're getting agencies engaged who are bringing creative services and design to making their ideas way better than they would have ever been. Sometimes they have bad names, sometimes they're going after the wrong market, sometimes they're designed by programmers, which is never really a good idea. And or at least out of the, once you get past a certain threshold. And so I think design's critical because it forces you to communicate more succinctly, it forces you to know your message more clearly, it makes you look better, more polished and presentable, and I just think it forces a discipline in the storytelling that wouldn't otherwise exist.
So we don't have a Branbury here. As you look at, when do you think it's replicatable? In that, do you think that we have the opportunity to have a Branbury-like hub here? That Tech Columbus is probably the closest thing that we've got. I think and we're making progress toward that end. But I think the advantage that the Branbury probably has over what we have happening in Columbus right now is they started out saying, we just said it, that understanding the customer, understanding what problem you're solving, and then how you're efficiently and effectively going to solve that problem is really where the Branbury starts. They're less concerned about technology and what you're going to write it in, and even frankly whether it's proprietary or not, right?
True.
They sort of look at it and say, if you're solving a problem that enough people have, we don't even really care if this is protected or proprietary, because if we get there first, right, and we address the problem, we filled the void, others are going to have to sort of go in our wake. So as you look at and you think about what those guys are doing there, when you look at Columbus from a sort of startup, and I'll even take it up to just a fundamental sort of ecosystem, if you will, where would you rate Columbus into what you're seeing happening in other markets, and what do you think we need to do to improving it better?
Wow, that's a good question. And I don't know, to be honest, if I'm even fully aware of all the pockets of activity in the city, because I sort of feel like there's a lot of pockets, but it doesn't feel like it's harnessed in a kind of cohesive way. So there's lots going on at Ohio State and the technology and commercialization work, and there was another group that was called like 2020 or not 2020, that's the whole other city thing. There's another group that was like the Branbury but smaller and less funded, and I can't remember the name of it. And so I feel like there's facets of activity around, and the Idea Foundry, and I mean, like, you start to add up a lot of the cool things going on in the city, but they don't feel cohesive coming kind of from a city perspective. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think that it was really, at the end of the day, a couple of entrepreneurs who were willing to do something on top of their day job in Cincinnati and got some funders behind it, some deep pockets, and then just got going. And they didn't have a lot of consensus building. Columbus has a lot of consensus building, if you haven't noticed. And some of that's okay, but some of it just gets in the way of progress. And so I would love to see us do more, quite frankly. I think that the Branbury modeled themselves after Austin, and they do so many things well. And I think they got it going pretty quick too. I mean, they're making an impact in a short amount of time.
Yeah, they've had some pretty tremendous success in a pretty short period of time. And been to the Branbury a couple of times. The space isn't going to knock you over, right? I mean, there's a lot of things about it where you say, wow, these guys are doing a lot with what appears to be a little. They really seem to be maximizing what they have going on.
The other one I forgot about, because I sit on the board of CCAD, we developed the Mind Market down there, which is awesome, because we're trying to say it's not just about graduating designers and artists. We want them to have entrepreneurial underpinning, and we want them to have the ability to sort of create and launch and be supported as they go out into the world. So that's another thing. Like, there's a lot of things in Columbus, but they're not all like stitched together. Even if they were stitched together as an ecosystem of interdependence and kind of helping. I guess an ecosystem is exactly that. You're interdependent and you need each other for mutual success. I think that would be pretty awesome, but to be honest with you, I don't know what all the pieces and parts are, nor have I thought about how could they be architected together, but I think that we have a lot of room to do more.
The mind market, I'm glad you mentioned that. One, that's where Civic Hacks is going to be, and I've met a couple of times with the people at the mind market, and Jim Johnson, who sort of runs their I don't even know what to call it, the CCAD agency, if you will, where they're having students work on some projects to get paid to work on real client projects. That seems like that's going to be, I think there's a great opportunity there in that whether you're a designer or developer, I think when you go to school, you then learn a craft, and then you have to then go out and figure out who you're going to convince that you know your craft well enough for them to hire you. And I think designers may even have a more difficult time with it than developers. So I think that CCAD has created this internal agency that students can work on real client projects. It is really going to be a boom for the school, and I think really be a nice on-ramp for students to get into careers rather than to have a portfolio that they then you have to figure out sort of what to do with.
Yeah, I think it's awesome. I think both are necessary, but I think it's great for the students. And it's great for businesses because they get to work with the students and then they can see who they want to recruit, and yeah, it's good for everybody.
Yeah, I'm going to throw it out for questions. Who has a question for Kelly about resource, startups, design? Yep, go ahead.
So that sort of design space is really, really crowded. How do you guys, I mean, size helps, but how do you guys differentiate in that space?
The design space meaning kind of the marketplace? Is that what you mean? Is that what you mean?
The industry, agency industry that you're in, resources there.
Yeah, I mean, it's increasingly challenging, to be honest, and we're really kind of working on it. It's part of what putting together the company's resource with Almirati is we're working on a more differentiated value proposition. So that, and we're also going to be renaming and relaunching a combined company. So Almirati name will go away, the resource name will go away. We have not settled on all of that. We're working on it right now. So that's kind of part of it. It's a really, you make a great point. I mean, I think at the end of the day, we are generally differentiating from our consumer orientation and identifying the consumer need and solving from that vantage point. A lot of our competition doesn't do that. We talk a lot about the two things that we're putting together in our space is the ability to imagine and deliver. So there's a lot of agencies that can think big and have big ideas, but they can't deliver them creatively or technically or from a data standpoint and on if their life depended on it. So we really focus on the and of imagine and deliver. There's a lot of tech companies that can build things all day long, and you could drive a truck over them and they'll be awesome and they'll last forever, but they might not be able to imagine what's the right solution for the brand and the consumer. So that's kind of how we're focusing it in our space, but design purely isn't, design is just a piece of kind of what we're bringing to the table. We're trying to help our clients understand the entire ecosystem of touch points in which they interact with their consumer and identifying where the met and unmet needs are, where they're served and underserved and overserved, and trying to find ways that digital often, but digital services, digital layers of communication can fundamentally meet a need that it couldn't before. And so there's endless, examples of that in our portfolio, but that's kind of how we're focusing on it right now.
Do you see clients that are clients risk adverse right now, or do you see on the whole clients willing to try new things and be innovative? What are you saying?
I see the big clients more risk averse. because they're focused on simplification and scale. So some of our biggest clients are trying to figure out what's the one thing we can roll out across the entire globe. And so it's about standardization, efficiency, risk minimization. And the smaller brands are completely the opposite. And so that's why you're seeing some of the most creative breakthrough business models coming from companies like Uber or Method, or the list goes on and on. The smaller companies that aren't held back by legacy issues or global limitations or standardization have an advantage. So we're definitely seeing the creative risk, the innovative risk coming out of kind of smaller brands. We have a really big CPG company. We're going through a process right now where they're shrinking the number of companies they want to work with, and they had all this data that basically said globally they interviewed all their brands, and their brands said that they weren't getting great creative work from the traditional agencies. So the big global agencies were essentially not giving them what they needed. So now this particular company is stepping back and saying, wait, we're boring in the marketplace because we're hiring big, boring companies and we're framing the wrong problem to solve. So therefore, we're getting these uninspired outcomes. So now they're stepping back and saying, wow, actually, maybe we'll get better outputs from smaller teams that move faster and push us harder and work harder at solving the right problem instead of just the one that's been dictated by the client. So I see all the exciting work in the mid to small size companies, quite honestly.
And how small of a company will you guys work with and engage with?
You know,
Does it depend on the project a little bit?
We haven't really drawn lines in that area. We haven't done a lot of work on small clients historically, but mainly because when we've decided to focus on digital, the only companies spending in digital were big companies. So were Limited and P&G and Hewlett-Packard. Those were the only companies spending. That's clearly sort of changed and evolved, and so we've had a number of them come in recently that say we have this breakthrough technology and we have no idea what to name it, how to package it, what to do with it, what channels to sell in first. So we're just now starting to look at that through new eyes and say, okay, maybe that's an area where, like our new partners in Ammirati, they have a whole portfolio of brands that are all venture backed, and so that's been a sweet spot for them to work with. They worked with Vitamin Water when the guy was driving around in the back of the trunk of his car, and Pirate's Booty before anybody knew that was kind of a cool, healthy snack.
That's a thing?
Yeah. You know what Pirate's Booty is? That little popcorn snack you can get. It's sort of a healthy kid snack. So they've worked with a lot of these brands before they kind of made it big time. So I expect that we'll carve out more of our client portfolio in that area than we probably have in the past for a whole host of reasons.
What's the most challenging aspect of the business right now? Is it the sort of competitive confusion and that there are myriad design development firms now? Is it client risk aversion? What's the most challenging aspect of running the agency right now?
I would definitely say competitive confusion. So, clients are just bombarded. A lot of them just tell us they stop answering their phone. They don't answer their voicemail. They don't respond to their email. They just are so bombarded by people just trying to sell their capabilities that it's so confusing. Like one of my clients in San Francisco said, Kelly, I have a poster. I've never seen it, but she tells me it. I have a poster on my wall, and it's all the agencies across the top. And she does this gesture, which tells me dozens, and then all these activities down the side, and then I have a color-coded map, like which ones I call for which thing. So it's a maddening puzzle from a client perspective. If you're a CMO or a CEO, like whose capabilities are really going to be best in breed and solve the problem, or do you just go to a one-stop shop and hope you get and hope for the best? So I think competitive confusion is huge. The other thing that's happening in our industry is that clients are going away from a commitment of a certain financial sort. So we used to be able to start the year and know we're going to have X amount of business, so we could kind of look at the teams and how much talent and how many people and when is it generally coming in, and sort of flow it over the course of the year. Never easy, but always roughly we could do it with ease. But now clients have moved away from those kind of commitments significantly, and as Nancy Kramer always says, you're only as good as your last project. So we don't always know if we're going to have 5 times more business, 1 time, 1x, 5x, and it really is all in the performance. And so being able to prove your value and prove the results is really what's kind of feeding the future pipeline, and then having that expertise built into the project to really close the loop on results, because that takes time, money, effort, and sometimes clients don't want to pay for that. So having the analytics that demonstrates your business impact is pretty huge too.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
One of the intellectual property agencies creating their own intellectual property. Have you looked into that and thought about creating your own products?
Yeah, I mean, we've experimented with that quite a lot over the years, maybe more less successful than maybe we would like. We've definitely created our own products. We've created our own software. We've launched our own software. We didn't do it well or right and learned a lot along the way. We then sent 25 people to innovation school at Ohio State and got a lot smarter about stage gates and all that kind of stuff. So we've definitely experimented. We have some of our own intellectual property. We actually have 3 products now that are, we don't take them to market per se, but we use them to basically do our work more quickly. And we call them accelerators, and so the client gets value because we get to market quicker, and we get value because we earn a little bit every time we deploy it. So we have some experimentation with that. I'd like to see more. I think we could have whole new revenue streams in those areas.
Susan, do you have a question?
I did. So with its recent move, the Columbus Idea Foundry became the largest maker space in the world, which I think is really cool for Columbus and our community. How do you see this entire maker movement that we're seeing sweep the nation fit into the future of design, the future of how companies interact with their consumers, and what do you think it means for Columbus?
Those are good questions. I don't know if I have
There's a
all
lot
the
more
answers.
to it.
Yeah. No, I love what the Idea Foundry is doing. I think it's super cool, and we're going to be over in that hood soon because we're moving our headquarters over to Rich and High, so just southeast of the Columbus Commons, and so we'll be a little bit closer. I think that the maker movement is something, it's funny, like it's so hot right now, but in many ways it's been building for so long. And if you grew up in design, you've always felt like the world was a maker world. And so, I think it's a bit of a trendy expression, but I think it's a real thing that's been happening for quite some time. I think it's great for Columbus. Columbus has more creative capital in our city than I think, I don't know, somebody said it was like third in the U.S. I don't really know how those statistics are generated, but if you look at the creative firepower in our city, I think it is only starting to be harnessed. I think Denny Griffith at CCAD has done a ton on this. Doug Kreidler at the Columbus Foundation, Nancy Kramer, they've all partnered to figure out how the creative economy, more broadly defined, helps sort of advance Columbus as a hot place to be. So I think there's a lot of advantages it has in terms of the talent it brings into the city, but also the talent that it keeps. Because I think one of the things, I've been on some of the city initiatives where, we just have too many young people moving out of Columbus when we actually have a lot of resources and an open mindset where we should be harnessing more of that young talent, I think, in new ways. So I love it. I think there's probably way more that could be done on that front than we're currently doing.
There was a thing done as part of the bicentennial that was called Ideas.
Yeah.
That was kind of a design.
That was awesome. I went to that.
Yeah.
I think it was the right idea. It's just sort of continuing those things. So they invited all those little journals, and is that what you're talking about? It was displayed in that space where the old Lazarus used to be, and it invited ideas to help shape and improve Columbus. And I would love, I mean, you know, I wrote the open brand, so I would love the city of Columbus to be more open in terms of creative contributions from the city or from its citizens. So what you're doing is huge, and having a way of making a mark on the city in a meaningful way. I think that's really awesome.
Other questions? Yeah.
What are you most proud of? You've done a lot of great work at Resource. What are you most proud of to date? And what would you like your legacy to be?
Oh my goodness. What am I most proud of? Beyond my children, because you can't really say that, right? No, you know, I'm proud that, you know, the business is more than 30 years old and we've remained independent. And I'm proud about that on a lot of levels, because I think despite all the public holding companies that come our way, that hasn't really been remotely interesting to us. And so I'm proud that we're staying focused on the people and the work and the clients, and we don't always have it figured out, and we aren't perfect, and we have all of our own bumps just like everybody else. But I'm proud that we've stayed focused on what really matters. I mean, if you look at the whole Publicis Omnicom merger, I don't know if anybody's followed, but the two largest, or two of the three largest holding companies trying to come together in our space, and it was just a disaster on every level. And it all ended last week, and it ended because they were doing it for all the wrong reasons. They were doing it because they had big egos, and it was, you know, financially beneficial to them, but not to the people who worked for them, nor for the clients. And so I think when people make business decisions for the wrong reasons, then that's the outcome that generally happens sooner or later. So I'm proud that we make decisions based on our values, and I'm proud of that. And Nancy Kramer started that 33 years ago, and I feel like we continue that today with her. And so I'm proud of that. You know, my legacy, I think I'm still working on that. I mean, it's funny you ask that, because I really have been doing a lot of just reflection of myself recently and what I really want that to be. And I really do want it to be about the pursuit of excellence, and inspiring the pursuit of excellence, and building a culture of creativity in ways maybe that we haven't fully achieved yet. And so that's kind of how I'm focusing my time and my energy, and how I'm trying to contribute today.
Any more books in the works?
Oh my gosh, everybody asks me that. I've written 2, and I have 2 children, and it sort of writing a book sort of feels like, this could be too much information for them, and it sort of feels like birthing a baby. So I wrote both of those books, and in each case I had a co-author. I was so fortunate to have inside the business, but each time I felt like the content was literally busting to come out of me. Like, I literally would sit down at a keyboard and close my eyes, and it was like literally flowing out of my hands. And so I had something really like I wanted to say, and I won't do that until I have that feeling. And when I had the idea for the open brand, I was like, oh my God, brand building is going to change. And open source technology is going to fundamentally change how people interact with brands and brands with the consumers. Oh my God, this is going to be huge, and nobody sees it coming. And like, I just had this like feeling and this instinct and this idea, and I like had to like literally get it out. So until I have that feeling, I'll say no. I'm actually just enjoying reading other people's books right now. So that's kind of good enough.
Okay, so now I have to ask, so what do you read?
A mix of things. So I'm reading Creativity Inc. right now, so the CEO of Pixar's book. It's fascinating. It's so great. It's just simple, but I love that he said all of my movies suck until they don't. And he's basically encouraging candor and ego setting aside, and helping like to make the product better. And I think that's the hardest thing in a creative environment, is how do you get the candor without people feeling like personally wounded. So I'm reading that, and I'm reading it with 25 people in the company, and we're discussing. Of course, I read Lean In, and so I'm reading that, or I've read that with like another 25 women in the company, and we're discussing. about gender equality and the importance of that. And then I just finished Daring Greatly, which is such an interesting book around vulnerability, personal vulnerability, and maybe not something that was my core strength that I'm really sort of focusing on. And you don't really sort of associate vulnerability with leadership, but that was really an eye-opening book for me recently. And then the last one I just read on a plane, because I had to go to Europe and back, I read the guy, and I'm forgetting his name, but he wrote Search Inside Yourself, and he's a Google guy, and it's basically bringing mindfulness into the work environment, which he basically said, oh, we all work so hard, and yeah, we have all this food and bouncy balls all over the place, but everybody's super stressed out. And so he learned mindfulness and how to be really self-aware and kind of very centered, and learned a lot of techniques for practicing that, which just made him a more healthy human being. And therefore, then he brought it into the workplace, and they loved it so much at Google, then they supported him to write the book. And it's super simple, and I just read it, and it was very enlightening. So those are some of my current reads.
Cool. Got time for a couple more questions. Yep.
What's been your biggest failure and how have you overcome it?
Biggest failure. There are many. I don't know if I could categorize one bigger than the other. I think hiring the wrong people is as a leader and not acting soon enough. I always believe in people and I always want to think over time it's all going to work out and with enough feedback or input, but that's not necessarily the case. So I think not moving quickly enough when I made a bad decision on a hire would definitely rank up there. My advisory board tells me if you get it right 70% of the time you're succeeding. So I take a little solace in that. But so I would say I'm somewhere around that 70% rate. But also the example you asked around intellectual property, I used a lot of the firm's resources and time and money developing a product and didn't have the right business plan, didn't quite honestly have the right consumer need identified, solving, I think, the wrong problem, and it churned and it churned and it churned, and we learned, but we didn't, and we kept going and kept going. And so not stopping things soon enough, and that would be one of them. I think that it's always easy to greenlight things. It's really hard to kill things and then celebrate the fact that we killed it, we learned, and we moved on. I think I probably let things live on too long instead of just nipping it. So that cost the firm, some significant money and time. So those are a couple, but I'm sure if we sat here, I can give you a long list. So yeah.
Any more questions?
Yeah, I was just curious, you were highlighting earlier, one of the huge problems with startups is finding that right consumer problem and then focusing the design around that. From what you've seen with working with startups at the Branbury and others, what would you say past that? So once you've figured that out, you have that right in terms of you found a problem, and you still have limited resources. So say you took yourself, you didn't have resources to rely on, what's maybe the next biggest problem you see? And if you didn't have a budget to deal with it, how would you solve that problem in terms of getting the messaging right to those consumers or designing your brand around that or your product?
So I just want to make sure I understand the question.
Sure.
Are you talking about how if you don't really have any money to go to market, how are you thrifty and resourceful? Or can you just maybe...
Yeah, maybe you have the money to go to market, but maybe not to get the backing of a great agency to help you craft your message or do some of the things that if you had a more expansive budget, you would say, oh, I should really do that because they're really good at doing that work. But
I think I don't think you need a big agency. I think you just need creative talent. And I was talking to a head woman at Kraft the other day, and I didn't know this data point, but she said there's 13,500 agencies in the U.S. with fewer than 5 people. It's the highest number ever that's ever been. So I think that there's lots of great 2, 3, 5-person shops. And there's also some that would be willing to take a small bit of equity for a creative contribution. And so those are the kind of choices I think you have to make to say, maybe we don't have the cash, but maybe we actually would be willing to give, 1% or 2 or 5 or whatever is the dynamic for somebody who's going to be all in. There's nothing that would replace, I tell you, if you get a creative person or a small team who believes in what you're doing, they will kill themselves with what they produce and create to make you look awesome. Now, if they don't believe it, that would be my criteria. They have to believe in what you're doing, because otherwise it's just a design exercise. But if they believe in what you're doing, then that's a life commitment, and they just go all in, and it's very different sort of effort that you get. So those are a few of the things I would think about, is to not feel like it's either you can have it or you can't have it. And quite honestly, you could go to somewhere like CCAD. It's very economical, or to find a student that wants to sort of get in on an opportunity. So I think there's lots more options today than there used to be, quite honestly.
One more question? I see. Yeah.
You were talking earlier about the analytics and how you look at things after the project. How do you measure the success, quote unquote, of the brand or of the project that you're doing in the aftermath of that project?
Well, the thing that's different now is that, we have to know in advance what's important. So and every project's different. So some of our projects are really clear. We want to drive sales. At the end of the day, success is more sales. In some cases, it's we want to acquire more customers. In some cases, we want to get more business out of the customers we already have. We don't actually need any more customers. We have plenty of customers, but they don't buy from us enough. In some cases, our clients want to just make a PR splash. They want to be perceived as innovative, whether they are or whether they aren't, or whether it delivers business results. So I could come up with 10 different things that our clients care about. In each project, it varies. So part of the initiation is being really clear about what business problem are we solving and what does success look like. I can't tell you, I would say from 2000 to 2010, every digital project we had, we would get to the end, and the clients didn't know if they were successful, didn't care if they were successful, because they just needed to keep going. But now it's fundamentally different. Now the board wants to know, how did this ladder up to my CMO, and how did this deliver business results? And so now these executives have pressure that they didn't have before. Digital used to be like this kind of sandbox off to the side, and it was kind of a rounding error for some of the other brands relative to what they were spending on TV, or what they were spending on catalogs, or maybe what they were spending, on stores. But now that the shift and the spend is really changed, the board wants to know, the CEO wants to know. There's a lot of pressure. So you can't just wait to the end and say, were we successful? Because you have to figure out, what do I need to track? What tags do I need? What data feeds do I need? What client data do I need? What can I get from third parties? Because usually we're doing some sort of algorithm that adds up multiple data points into a success factor. So it's gotten more complicated, and that's a talent area that I think is just going to explode, which is probably why we have IBM and OSU and all that partnership underway. And so I think that area is just going to be enormous, and is really important part for you guys as you're thinking about your own businesses.
Okay, Kelly Mooney.